In this video, I want to go through the process of setting up a main material, a material that we can use as a foundation for any material instance that we want to create. So we can use this to avoid having to go and create any of the base logic that we would typically put into a material. So if you look through this material instance that I have here, we have some different things parameterized that we can use to really go in and modify this material to make it unique to whatever our purposes are. So if you look under textures here, we can, if we want, we can add textures to this material. So if I check Albedo, I can select this and define the diffuse or albedo color for this from a texture sample. Same for the normal, roughness, and specular. And then additionally, we have some parameters for each of those categories. So for albedo, for example, if we decide that we don't want to use a texture, we can uncheck this, and that would allow us to, in theory, use just a color sample instead, or a float 3, float 4. And then up here we have some parameters for rotation and position and scaling for the material. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can get that set up. First things first, I'm going to go to the root of the project, my folder material library, and then under main materials. And I'm going to right click, let's do material, and let's call this m_base mat, and that'll be the name I'll use for this. Typically you would see master material like m_master material or m_base. I'll use, or main is another commonly used phrase, but I'm gonna use base for this. Let's go ahead and open that up, drag this over here. And let's start by adding a texture sample for our albedo. So I'm going to call this, let me rename this and call it albedo. All right, I need to parameterize this. So right click. So first I hold on T and click to get a texture sample, convert to parameter, and then let's call this albedo. That'll be our color or our texture for this. And then there's a couple of parameters or things that we can parameterize or change for our texture sample or for our albedo base color. So the first thing we want to modify would be the brightness of our material. So what we want to do, let's click M, click, and then we're gonna create a parameter, so s_click, and then we'll call this albedo brightness. Okay, so this is just a scalar value. We'll use this to adjust the brightness for the material. So I'm gonna plug this in here, and then we'll plug this directly in. Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and let's put this into a group. Yeah, let's just call it albedo. Okay. And then I'm gonna go ahead, I'm just gonna make a couple of parameters here and then we'll rename them. So we have our brightness, then we need one for contrast, and then one for saturation. Okay, so let's rename this contrast, albedo contrast. And we're going to parameterize for, do the same process for our specular and roughness as well, so, which is why I'm naming it in this way. Albedo saturation. Okay. Now, for our contrast, we're going to use not a panner, we want a power. So I'll search for that. So right click, search power, We'll drag that up. And then this will be our exponent, so we'll plug that in there. For your albedo brightness, let's default to 1. And then for the contrast, we'll do 1 again as well. So basically our defaults will have no effect on the material. And then once you create a material instance of this, you can go in and adjust these parameters as you see fit. And so yeah, for the saturation, we're gonna do the same thing. We'll do a 1. We're gonna click and hit O, and that'll give us a 1 minus. We'll plug this into there, and then we'll do M, click, and get a multiply node. Plug that in directly there. Okay. So let's make sure we have our connections here. I don't think I put these into the same group, so let's go ahead and make sure we have those in our albedo group. For the albedo texture, I'm actually going to put that into a new group. I'm going to call that, let's call that textures. Okay. I think that's what I had over here, right? Yeah, that textures category. So we're doing groups because that helps us identify things as we're looking through here. This is a pretty basic base material. You can add a lot of things in here. So ideally, you want to put things into categories or groups so that you can identify them and find them easily. Okay, so let's do that. And then we'll do, actually, I'm going to do one more parameter. This is going to be our, actually, let's do, instead of a scalar, let's do a multiply node, and then we will add, all right, so instead of a scalar, let's do v click, and that'll give us a vector or float3 that we can use. And we'll do albedo tint is what we want. Albedo tint. And this will let us adjust the tint of that texture. So we'll plug that in there. And then we'll need one more parameter here. So this allows us to use a texture, right? So we have 4 different properties or parameters that we can adjust for this texture. But in the case that we want to not use a texture, we could have a regular base color. So let me just duplicate this, and we'll rename this to, let's do albedo base color. And then there's a way to switch between different options. Basically this is what we want, static switch param. So what this lets us do, you'll see if I come back to the material instance, we have these parameters here that are just a checkbox, right? So you have to enable it, and then you can check or uncheck this option. This allows you to switch between different paths, right? So if we'll default it to true, that just means that we'll use this texture if it's true. Otherwise, if it's false, then we'll be using this base color. So let's give that let's just make it like a grayish color. How about 0.18 is what we want. Something like that. And then let's do, yeah, I'll just leave that like that. I was going to change it to white. I might do that in this, see what it looks like afterwards, because we don't want it to have too much of an effect. But if it's disabled, I think that'll be all right. So we'll leave that there for now. Let's plug this into our base color, and then we need to set a texture here. So let's do concrete, I think is what I had on there. Poured concrete, maybe. Let's just do that one, see what that looks like. Okay. All right, so this is the the logic for our albedo, let's see what that, well, let me go through and create some more first, and then we can kind of see what that looks like in a new material instance that we create based off of this. But let me go ahead and comment this out. Let's call this albedo. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and save. And then let's do specular next, since that's next coming down. For our metallic, we're actually just going to do a constant value, but we will do not a comment. Let's just delete that. We'll just do a parameter. We'll parameterize it, but we'll just need a constant value, because really, when you're working with the metallic value in PBR within Unreal Engine, what you want to do 99% of the time is either have a 0 or a 1 for your metallic. And that just means that in the real world, either a material is metallic or it's not. So there's a special case, there are special cases. So if you have a material that is mixed, like it has rust, and then in some places you want the metallic color to come through, you can set a value in between 0 and 1. And there's other cases where that might be, but 99% of the time, the rule of thumb would be to have your metallic be between 0 or either 0 or 1. So let's call this metallic, and then we'll just connect that directly. Okay. All right, so that's there. Let's do specular. We're going to just copy, probably, I think we just need brightness and then contrast for specular. So let's do that. And then let's just paste those down here. I will rename these. So this will be specular. And then, so we have specular. Let's rename this real quick to specular brightness. There we go. And then we'll do the same for the contrast. Specular. Okay. And then we do want to put these in a new group, so we'll do specular again. I probably should just copied and pasted that. Would have made my life easier, but and then yeah, we'll leave that in the textures group. And then we do want another parameter, so we'll put that down here. And we'll connect that there. And then in this case, we just need to do a scalar value for this. So S, click again, and we'll just call this base specular. Okay. Connect that. We'll do a default value of 1 for that. And then this is going to connect into the specular. Right there. I'm just going to drag this down a little bit. We'll move that down there. Okay. All right. That'll be our specular. Not too bad there. All right. So the nice thing is the roughness is pretty much going to be the same as specular, so it doesn't take too much longer to get that set up. So I'm going to just copy this. We'll put that down here. And then we just need to go through and rename all these. And I'll try to be a little quicker. So we'll copy roughness. And then we can come in here. We'll rename this to roughness, brightness. I don't know if I like that name, but we'll keep it for now. And we'll rename that. Contrast. And then this will be our base roughness. Okay. And for base roughness, we probably want to do, so I think the default is like 0.2 or 0.4 for roughness in Unreal Engine. So actually, yeah, 0.5 right there, right? So it's right in the middle. So maybe we start with 0.5. So it's the default value if we're going to use this scalar value instead of the texture sample. So we'll connect that into roughness. Let me rename the comment as well. Yeah, that's fine. This will be roughness, okay? And then we don't want to forget to put these into the correct group. So we'll come in here, new group for roughness. And that should do it for that. I think I will move these forward a little bit. Like so. Okay. And the last thing we're gonna set up is our normal. So let's go ahead, I think we'll just copy, we'll start with this. Actually, start with both of these, like so. Okay. And I don't know if we need to parameterize this. I might just do a static value of 0 in that case. Because really, that's not going to give us very much information. Ideally, you're going to use a texture, or you're just not going to use a normal. So let's do this. Let's just do a scalar value, just do a 0. And then we'll plug this in. Actually, what we want to do is adjust the depth of our normal map. So there's a material expression node for that. If you search for flatten normal, we can use this to adjust the flatness or the height of our normal map. So what we want to do, we need one scalar parameter. We'll call this normal intensity. And we'll drag this up. We'll add a 1 minus node. Oops. We'll plug that in there. Okay. And then we'll plug this in here. Let me drag this over just a little bit, just to keep it a little bit cleaner. All right, and then this is going to go into plug into our normal output there. Okay. All right, and then I want to just add a comment around these guys. We'll call this normal. The last thing to do is to put these into a group. All right, that's a scalar, so we'll just do this normal. There we go, our normal intensity. And that should probably be a 1. There we go. Okay. All right, so this is a good start, right? Now everything, all these values are parameterized, which means when we create a material instance, they will show up in the settings, in the details or settings that we have there. And we can adjust these values to really fit what we're looking for that material. Let me go ahead and save real quick. And then now that we have this piece done, the next thing to do would be to give us the ability to adjust the position, the scale, and the rotation of this material. So in order to do that, we're going to actually create a material function, a really simple material function for that. And then we'll need a couple of parameters in here. But let's go ahead and create a material function real quick first. So I want to go back here. Under material, and then where is it at? Material function is what we want. Here we go. Let's call it mf underscore PSR. So that'll be material function underscore position, scale, rotation. Okay. And let's go ahead and open that up. All right. So the first thing, let's go ahead and just change the name of the output so that we know what this is giving us, what information that we're getting from this. So we're getting the UV, let's call it UV transformed. So we're gonna use the parameters in here to modify the position, scale, and rotation. And so we're gonna be transforming the UVs So that gives us kind of a general idea on what's going on there. Next thing, let's just start by getting a texture coordinate. Okay. So this gives us the UV information. So screen position, or excuse me, UV information in screen space is what this is going to give us. So 2D representation essentially of information of the pixels on the screen. So we'll use that, and then let's start with rotation, since we named it, well, we did use PSR, maybe I should do RSP instead, but let's start with rotation, because I'm already typing it. Okay, so we have this custom rotator material expression. Let's go ahead and we'll plug the UVs into there, or the texture coordinate output into there. We'll do a divide, so D click. That's going to connect to our rotation angle. And then what we want to do is add a function input. So if you right click and search input, we'll select that function input. Over here in the name, in the details, let's change the input name to scalar, or excuse me, that's the value. That's what it's going to be. Let's call this rotation, but we want the type to be a scalar. So under input type, let's change that function input scalar. So the first option there. Okay. And then we'll just plug this into here. And let's change this to -360. That'll give us a starting point for our angle. Okay. All right. And then I'm just going to drag this over just a little bit because I want to add a comment around this section for rotation. Okay. All right. And then next we'll do the scale. So we'll need 2 inputs. Duplicate that. Actually, before I duplicate, let's go ahead and just change this to a scalar. And this will be our so this will be for our tiling. So we'll call this U tiling. And then yeah, input type scalar. So that looks good. Now we can duplicate this, makes it a little bit easier because we already have the correct type there. We'll call this V tiling. There we go. And then we'll need a divide node. And we're going to use, actually not an add, what we want is a append. So if you do A and click, that'll give you an add, but what we actually want is append vector. So there's 2 append nodes here. Append many, that allows us to add multiple values together. So all 4 channels, we can choose what our output's going to be. So if you just want to add 2 scalars together, we can do that and get RG or RGB, RGBA. In this case, we just have 2 inputs, so let's just use append vector. Oop, not append many, append vector. There we go. And so we have 2 scalar values. This is going to put them together and give us a float 2. That's what we want. So I'll plug this into here. Drag that up just a little bit. And move that up. Okay. So that's our scale. And lastly, let's do position. So going to be super similar to our scale. So I'm going to copy this. The only difference is, well, for one, the names of the parameters. So this is going to be actually U offset, because we're just changing position. And similarly, this will be V offset. Okay. And then instead of a divide, let's do an add. So now we can do that A click. That'll give us the add node there. Plug these in here. And that's going to go into our output node. Okay? And that's it for our material function. So we'll hit apply and save. And then we'll go back to our base material. Zoom out just a little bit here. And then what we need to do is, I'm actually going to go to the content browser and we'll drag that material function into our graph. Okay, and you see now we have 5 different parameters here that we need to put inputs to. So this is where I think I mentioned we need to create some parameters in this graph. So this is where that happens. So we're going to create just a couple here. We'll start with utiling, so we can call that utiling. And we'll start that with the value of 1. Okay. And then we'll just duplicate that. And that'll be our vtiling. Okay. And then we need our offsets. So let's create those. Drag that down. Okay. So let's call this U offset and V offset. And actually we want, oh, I can't spell, can I? Let's fix that. V offset. We want this to have a default value of 0. That way we're not offsetting, we're offsetting by nothing. I think that if that's correct, yeah, we're adding, right? Oh, I didn't change my comment name. Let's fix that. That should be position. There we go. So we're going to add 0 to our position, and that's what we want for the default. Okay. And then we need, the last one is rotation. So let's click, actually I'll just copy our V offset and do one more here. And then, yeah, I think rotation, same, we want it to have a default value of 0. We'll just change this to rotation. And then we can connect all these like so. Okay. All right. Now, all this information needs to then plug into our textures here. So each of these it'll go into the UVs. And so all this information will affect how those textures appear. So we'll affect the scale, the rotation, and the position for each of these textures. And that's what we want. So we want them all to be affected equally, right? Because we don't want our, if we're using textures that we created or imported, they're going to match up, or they need to match up. So we don't want our normal map to not look the same as our color, right? All right, so that should do it. Let me go ahead and apply and save. Okay, and then let's go into our, well, let me just zoom out a little bit so we can see what that looks like. So we have our logic for affecting position, scale, and rotation. We have our texture samples, and then we have a bunch of parameterized values that we can affect, like our brightness and contrast, saturation and tint for albedo. And then if you choose not to use texture samples, you can switch those off and just use the constant values instead. All right. So I think that's a good start. Let's zoom out, and then let's go ahead and go into here. We'll select our m_base material. Let's right click and then do create material instance. Okay, let's call this mi base mat sample. Oh, and I almost forgot. Okay, so we need to put these into a group, right? So let me fix that. let's do that real quick. Select all of them, and then let's just call this, let's make this the first thing that we edit. So we'll do underscore, and then we'll do PSR. And that'll tell you position, scale, and rotation is what these parameters are for. Okay. And then let's see if we got everything else here. Oh, looks like, oh yeah, so I did forget one thing. Actually a couple of things that I'm looking at. So for one, our normal map is just named Roughness as well. So this is just a duplicated node of the same thing. So let's change this to normal. That's what it should be. And then I didn't change the textures, but probably what you want to do is put, a matching texture just so that you have something to sample off of by default. But I'll leave it like that for now. I think it'll be all right. Okay. Oh, the other thing is, so our parameters, I didn't name our parameters or put them into a group. So I think what I want to do is I'll put this into the Albedo group, or put them each into their corresponding group. So this will be Albedo. We'll just call this like use Albedo. I think it's what I had before. Or use Albedo texture maybe might make more sense actually. Let's do that. Okay. And then we'll do the same for this. So this will go into Specular. Oops. We'll call this okay. And then we'll change the group to Specular. And this will be Roughness, use Roughness. Roughness group, and then the last one will be our normal. So use normal texture, and that'll go into our normal group. Okay. And let's make sure. So we have roughness, specular. I think that looks better now. Okay, we'll hit apply and save. Okay. Let's go ahead and go into our material instance. And now we have our categories. Looks good. We have our parameters for our position, scale, and rotation, modifications. We have our albedo, use albedo texture. So if you notice, if you uncheck that, it removes the texture option here, which is what we want, so that's good. And then as well as those parameters, so that's good. The only thing I think I don't see, actually, so yeah, I think I missed a couple of parameters. So this should, as far as group goes, so I want our albedo tint to be in the albedo category. And same for metallic. Metallic should be in the metallic group, but that's all right. Normal, roughness, looks good. Specular, and yeah, our texture. Okay. All right, and then this is just the general information about the material. So the parent, etc. So I think that's a good stopping point. If you followed along, then you can go back and fix those, put those into the correct group or name the groups as you see fit. But now you have, at this point, you should have a material that you can use as a foundation for your other materials. So instead of having to go in and add all the nodes in, you can now go ahead and just check albedo, normal, roughness, specular, and assign the textures that you imported to that. So you'll create a material instance, obviously, for that, and then adjust these settings, and you'll be good to go. All righty, we're going to stop there, and thanks for watching.